good evening, everyone. I'm Ava Klingenberg. Welcome to the International Photography Hall of Fame Digital Happy Hour, Unplugged with Robert George. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to highlight the image behind me from the IPHF collections. This image is titled The Guggenheim Hat and was taken by 2019 IPHF inductee Tony Vaccaro. Tonight, we have Robert George here with us to share highlights of his award-winning photography and thoughts on making photographs and finding new subjects in the year of masks and COVID-19. Robert trained as a travel photographer, but was drawn into portrait photography when clients began requesting corporate headshots and event photography. He has covered weddings across the US and Europe, presidential campaigns, film stars and celebrities, and more. To create his images, he employs classical studio techniques, photojournalism, and paparazzi styles blended with a fine art eye. During the lecture tonight, please make sure your mic is muted. Should you have any questions, please type them in the chat below or save them for Q&A, which will take place at the end of the presentation. Following today's event, a brief survey will be sent out to all attendees. We invite you to suggest other topics to include for our future lectures there. Thank you. And now, Robert George.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this tour that we're about to take that I've entitled Unplugged. It's a bit of a road trip through my career in photography. I think any career in photography is relatively odd because it's an odd profession, but I hope you will find it inspiring. And I've always been greatly inspired by the works of other photographers. And I'm happy to take questions at the end. So we're going to start on Glengarry Road, which I consider metaphorically to be sort of the road of my photography life. I stumbled upon this road in the Highlands of Scotland many years ago. It wasn't even on a map. The locals just referred to it as Glengarry Road. It was more of a path, a cart path, if you will. And I had no idea at the time where my work, my passion, my endeavors in photography would take me. So I want to take you on that road trip. This is the first photograph I believe I made. It was in Miami, and I was there on vacation, and it was out the back of the car through the back window. It was made with Kodachrome film, and I believe a Nikon camera. I was just amazed by the beauty and the glory of these tall buildings that ran up along the Ocean Boulevard. And that led me to this work, which was travel photography. This is Paris, of course. And I was inspired by the Parisian and the French humanist photographers that I had seen their work. A lot of them were street photographers. And my mentor, Jay Maisel, who was admitted to the Hall of Fame just last year, always talked about the photograph that brings you to photography. And he used to share with his workshops what that photograph was for him. And for me, it was this photograph, which is the great Alfred Eisenstadt. And these are the children at the puppet show in the Tuileries. And I think I remember first seeing this picture and just being amazed by the incredible spectrum of looks on these little faces. And I didn't know it at the time, but this is the image that drew me into photography even more deeply. So this is Deep House, and this is typical of the work that I like to do. I'm not a landscape photographer, but I love traveling. I love working on the street. And when I stumble onto a landscape like this or this, I just love making these kinds of images. And this isn't necessarily connected to the kind of work I do to earn a living, or what I've been doing during the time of COVID, but I thought I would start here and share these kind of images because this is where I come from. As some of you may know who have followed my work, I've done a lot of work at country fairs, and it's a great place to photograph people. It's a fun environment. It's summer. This is at the Iowa State Fair, as is this. That is what we call a happy accident. You'll hear me talk about that again, that these children ran through this still life architectural picture I was trying to do of the root beer stand. This is my version of a street portrait. My work has been called quiet. I think I have a quiet eye, for what it's worth. I love to photograph at night, and oftentimes the people I'm photographing don't know that I'm there. And that's similar to the way I work parties and events. I'm there, but often unnoticed, which is good for the clients, I think, and good for me. Sometimes the best photographs are closest to home. This was on the street in front of my home. Rainstorm. So this past year has been a time for reflection because we've had time, I think, time to ask ourselves questions that maybe we haven't had time for in the past, a time of contemplation. So I'm going to be asking the questions like, what are my photographs about? What's my work about? Why do I make photographs? I've always said that photography for me was a way of making notes, like keeping a journal. You know, others may have different ideas about why they do what they do, but this is where I've started. Similar to the questions you might ask if you write professionally or not, or if you make music, whether you make it for others or for yourself. Why do we create? So this was my beginning professionally as an event photographer. This is a wedding photograph. I'm not going to show very many of those. We know what those look like, but this was done with the square format, a Hasselblad. And what was interesting to me, of course, was the frosted glass, rather than being able to see clearly. And so this is kind of a typical wedding photograph, I guess, right here in St. Louis. Portrait, black and white from the film era. Parties are probably the event I cover the most. Any kind of party, every kind of party, from the Super Bowl down to a local communion or family event. And that's not what I planned to do when I started. I started out as a travel photographer thinking that I would become a commercial photographer. And so that was my ambition, and that's what I did. I became a commercial photographer at the time when it was sort of the hottest thing to do. Commercial photographers were earning $2,000 day rates. That was the place to be. I didn't have a studio, so I became a location commercial photographer, which means you go on location to do an annual report or an executive portrait. And turn in the work to the agency that way. The rates were a little less, but I could do that kind of work. But that was very competitive as well. I was right in the middle of the baby boomer era, and all the good work was taken. And as fate would have it, a lot of my photographer friends started to ask me to cover their family events, whether it was a family portrait or a wedding or a party. And so I started doing that kind of work, and it kind of suddenly led me into a different kind of client and a different kind of work. This is not Abbey at the Coronado, but I've been covering these kinds of events for 20 years, and I have to tell you, it's been so much fun. When I started as an event photographer, we were rated down there with the school photographers. Not that they should be rated the lowest, but a far fly from the great fashion photographers and the commercial photographers and all the high-end branches of photography. But that's all changed with digital, especially with women coming into the profession. Event photography and portrait photography at the retail level, at the family level, has come up. It's an afternoon wedding. I do a great deal of work like this. This happens to be Sarah Neufeld, who's a member of the band Arcade Fire, who was at a party. My work has been, I've been fortunate, it's taken me all over the world. This is a wedding event in the south of France, in Provence. Bride and groom, it was a 3 or 4 day event. This was the night before the wedding on just the most idyllic square you could possibly imagine in Provence. And as a travel photographer, here I was employed on assignment, getting to do the kind of work that I started out doing initially and just loved to do. So at this point, I thought I'd come full circle. This is actually out the window of the client's apartment in this tiny town of Uzès, France. I don't know if this made it into the wedding book, but it should have. It didn't. Back home, this is a picture from a party in Chicago. I try to look at the people and the events that I'm covering from as interesting a point of view as I can, so that the pictures aren't just standard, but that they're what I call interesting and compelling. And this is an example of that. Everybody is at this grand party, and they're all busy on their devices. This is not just a statement about our times, but it's so true. Everywhere you go, the device is more interesting than the event, it would seem. Nobody noticed me. The name of this picture is on his tie clasp. It's called Not Just Another Pretty Face. I just love this picture, just so amazing and interesting to me. This young woman had stepped out of the party onto the street, and she may have been waiting for a car. This was from an event in San Francisco in Chinatown. So I'm showing you these pictures by way of giving you an idea of what kind of work I've done and what my background is and what I've come from. This is Misty Copeland, the dancer. I believe it's been said of Misty that she's the only ballerina people actually know by name. A protest picture from our own town. Another event picture. So when you make pictures, I think you show what it is you care about and something about how you care for it, what you see and how you see it. And we all see the same things, but because we're unique humans, we see things a little bit differently. And that's what we bring to our poems, our pictures, our songs. So this is the red carpet. I do a lot of work on the red carpet, but this is not in Hollywood, as you might think. This is from right here at home, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, an event I covered, and it was so stunning that I just had to include it for tonight. So no, not a movie star at the end of that runway. Just another party right here. These are the lips of Taylor Swift, and I photographed, this is my image that I re-photographed off the computer screen. And I've started doing this kind of work, during the time of COVID, when I had less work and started to pursue different avenues of photography to keep myself busy. Here she is at her premiere for her documentary film at the Sundance Film Festival last year. Evan Rachel Wood.
Oh, look at those eyes. Eyelashes. Yes.
This is Jessica Biel in Toronto, I believe, on the red carpet. Portrait of Hillary, who is just amazing to make images of, because she can give you 1,000 looks in less than a minute. And you know exactly why she's an actress after you spend time with her, because she's capable of controlling every millimeter of her face. And as good actors and actresses should be. Eddie Redmayne on the carpet in Toronto. This is Kristen Stewart. I've covered her a number of times, made a series of portraits of her. Here's the one that I like the best. She's gotten the most attention, I think, from the series of work I've done on her. So if you want to know what making the portrait of a celebrity is like, I will show you. It's not glamorous where they come to your studio and you have a staff of half a dozen people waiting to take care of them, and that's what we might expect it to be. It's this. You're competing for that picture with a gang of your colleagues. This picture came from People magazine. I know all of those individuals. They're all great photographers and they all do great work. There's Will Ferrell advertising his last film. This is my portrait of Gloria Steinem, who walked on the carpet, I believe, at the age of 85 for her documentary, which you can see now. Jessica Williams, the actress. I've covered all the major sporting events. Again, not as a sporting photographer because I am no expert, but as a portrait photographer. This was the PGA a couple years ago here in St. Louis, the championship. So this is the only technical slide I'll show, but photographers in workshops have a tendency to make lighting very complicated. And you take a class in lighting and you feel like you're just never going to be able to learn it. And I can put up a dozen lights in my studio, and we had quite a setup just to photograph this young lady, which was made in my studio. But actually, it's very simple. And if you want to start simple and understand lighting, just go to a window, take your subject to the window and stand them in front of the window and work with that light. And that will be the light that you see on the left. And on the right, if it's too much shadow, if it's too dark, if the shade is too deep, then fill it with a white reflector card, some kind of white reflector, piece of cardboard, any kind of white paper will do, just something to bounce light up into the shadow side of her face. And that's lighting. That's working with one light, the sunlight, and go from there, because every other light basically is an accent light. That's all I'm going to say about lighting, but I think we have a tendency as photographers to overcomplicate it, when in reality you can work with available light very simply and have a lot of fun. So this was another project of mine. It's not finished. It's called Monadnock. That's a long name, Monadnock. It's the name of a building in Chicago, actually a famous building that was built in the 1890s. And when it was built, it was the largest office building in the world and arguably the world's first skyscraper. So Harry Houdini, the magician, was just getting his start at this time. And I've walked around this building a number of times and was struck by how odd and interesting it is. So I decided to make a whole series of pictures and do a book on it. And so these pictures, the next half dozen I'm going to show you, are from the neighborhood around that building, Monadnock building, which is in the South Loop, and which is today dwarfed by huge skyscrapers. But it's a very, very interesting building. It's an architectural gem, has no steel in it. It's built in, it's entirely a masonry structure that supports 16 stories. That's it right there. The little building in between the two side buildings. Dearborn and Jackson. So here's the side of it. I've made a series of pictures from a parking lot. Get a sense of the age. And this was actually the addition on the right is the annex to the building, which came a few years later, which does have a steel structure. On the left is the original building, and then the seam between the two structures. It runs, it's like shaped like a shoebox. It runs the length of one city block. So this is, I show you these pictures just because it's a body of work, a series of images I've been working on for a long time. Kind of takes me away from my work as a portrait photographer. But it counts as street photography because I'm not working with architectural cameras. I'm just approaching this building as if it was another subject for me. There are retail establishments on the first floor, a few of them, a coffee shop. There's a hat shop that's quite well known. Optima hats. and then the people in the neighborhood. And before everyone yawns and goes to sleep, here's the person that was right on the street outside. Cindy, of course, is from Chicago, and so I shouldn't have been surprised to see her there. And here she is signing autographs right outside the front door. So this is a seascape of the Mediterranean. And this is my segue into the work that I've been doing during the time of COVID, which I'm going to show you now. Steps going down into a pool. The idea here is the layer of water that you're looking through to find the subject. And then finally, some flowers, which I've always loved, but never really photographed and wouldn't really even know how. But in the time of COVID, with a few other subjects, I'll show you what happened. This was taken through the window a few weeks after the pandemic started in a storefront down the street from my studio. Old theater chairs. And this pretty much says it all. Here we are, Living Arts, closed permanently. COVID did us in. We're so sorry to say we loved every moment of our time spent with you. So initially I began making pictures off the television screen. And I thought that was kind of a strange thing to do, and I didn't want to photograph proprietary films, you know, that other photographers had made. So I just photographed broadcast news and events. This was taken during the inauguration, but it gave me not only an interesting looking image, but a strange kind of grid that I was looking into. This actually is the first television picture I made of the moon landing as it happened live. So I just throw this in there. But this is from the inauguration, Amanda Gorman delivering that awesome poem that she did. Again, this is shot off a widescreen television with, I believe, an iPhone. I believe it's the camera I was using. The more finely detailed the grid, the higher resolution camera I was using. So I've photographed all kinds of television screens and monitors, computer monitors, studio monitors, and I've used a whole series of cameras, different Nikons, iPhones. This is at the inauguration. This is an image of a celebrity, I can't tell you who it is, that I rephotographed on the monitor in the studio. And I like it better than the original. It picked up some texture. So this was just kind of experimental fun that I was having that has turned into something more. I like this picture because, yeah, I thought maybe at first it was a little cheesy, but it's the, you know, it has both our new vice president and the Capitol building and the American flag all in one frame. That's actually the television changing from one cut to the next. And that's how it's photographed. This is an image from the Super Bowl made with an iPhone. That would be the Kansas City team in red. Again, a very interesting rendering. I've done nothing to that picture. That's as it came out of the camera. I'm not against Photoshop work. We do quite a bit of it in portraiture, and for anybody who saw the Super Bowl halftime and the weekend event, you'll recognize these scary faces. Again, shot right off the television screen. And here is just simply the grid of the widescreen TV. So I thought, well, this is kind of boring, but what can I do with this? Where will this lead me? And all I had to do was wait for the tonalities on the broadcast to change, and I get a whole spectrum of colors. It's everything passes through the television at one point or another, and so it's all game. The name of this picture is Al Roker's earpiece, which is exactly what it is. You can see just a little bit of his eyeglasses there. And this is simply the blank grid, the white grid. You can see some of the screening in there, and with one or two flaws that I've left in there, some open holes, almost looks like a dust spot, if you will. And then this, which doesn't really look like a television image at all, but each one of those marks is a unique and individual piece of code. And I just find this interesting because we're all living via our devices, even more so in the time of COVID. And this is the information age, if you will, the information highway. This is one of my images that I rephotographed on the monitor, a portrait that I made a secondary image of. And then the pictures started to become more abstract. There are two figures in this. You can see them in white, sort of bending toward each other, a left and a right figure. But it's the abstraction that draws me into this picture, and the colors. Here's an image where you see the outer grid of the screen, and the dust that sits on the screen, on top of the screen, and then through that to the image, which is out of focus. So a little more tightly resolved than this one, where you're seeing the smear of pixels. Here's another variation of that. So again, I was just looking for interesting things to do. My party and event business had dried up, so walking around my neighborhood, there wasn't much to photograph that I could find. So I turned to this, Times Square, New York, with a rainbow across it. Different kind of abstraction of an event that we all recognize, New York City street scene. This picture is called The Kiss. It's a close-up of lips, and slightly abstracted, if you will, by the movement. More color from the screen, with some texture and with enough design that when I look at this image, I get ideas about what this could be, what this might be, what that dark cloud or gust of wind could be. The grid has fans that emanate. They spread out like the wings of a peacock to the left and to the right. They emanate and change constantly and fill with different colors on the screen. So you can get something like this and then this, within moments of each other. The difference is this is made with a high resolution camera and this is made with an iPhone. So you get a different level of detail. So I think you probably have to like abstractions to appreciate these images. Otherwise, they don't have a side, a top, a bottom. They may be a little bit hard to relate to. For me, I just find the colors and the palette to be amazing. This image has a little honeycomb design to it, which I found interesting, along with the color. So different from that. And then this seemed to me almost to be like an underwater scene, done in a cubist style with 1,000 colors. And so this was made with an iPhone. I was a little bit concerned about the quality, but we printed this 20 by 30 in the studio, and it's it's like a little piece of photographic Monet, if you will. The colors are just gorgeous. There's another blue image. I've not done enough of this to understand why the side's vignette. And in a lot of pictures like this, there's a dark center. But the more of this I do, I'll figure out technically why those things are happening. This is the last of that series I'm going to show you. And I've called this entire series Neptunes. And I can't decide if it's an underwater series or taken from the planet, but that's its working name. So to reconnect that work with some of my previous work, this is a swimming pool in Morocco. This is a ship line in Miami. Not an abstraction, but it helps when you're told what this is. Otherwise, it just looks like 3 colors, 4 colors. And this is a picture from the Galleria Mall here at home of a shop that is yet to go in. St. Genevieve, Missouri, a series of old cars under the canopy of the forest. Morocco. And back to Paris, stencil on the cathedral wall. So it's said that in photography, it's nearly impossible, even for the expert, to positively identify the work of a photographer from one picture. But I want to argue with that a little bit. I think we ought to be able to do that. I think we should believe in the power of the single image to stand on its own, to capture your attention, to identify you as the artist or as the viewer. Certainly, there are individual pictures that we all remember. So I don't know that it's bodies of work that the art schools preach, the body of work ethic, but sometimes it's single images that carry the day, whether they're part of a series or not. So I just throw that out there as food for thought. Back to Glengarry Road. We're going to go down a different path now. In Scotland, I started photographing the rhododendron. And again, I didn't have close-up equipment. So I just did what I could with the Hasselblad. But I just fell in love with making pictures like this that was so unlike all the other work I did. And so I turned to doing this kind of work last year during the summer. And I just tried to find things in the garden or in the neighbor's yard or across the alley that I could photograph that I hadn't seen before. Elephant ears. And I found an entire world out there. The hibiscus, it looks like a tango dancer to me. This one I call Barcelona Nights. Again, it looks like a dancer of some kind with a full skirt. So this one kind of revived my interest in the tango and the how similar flowers are to the dance, all dances, if you will. This is the hibiscus wilted, and I photographed this flower 3 or 4 different times over a series of days to capture it in decay. I simply did this with a 50mm lens and a handheld camera, and I noticed that sometimes one end or the other end of the flower would be out of focus from depth of field because I wasn't able to shoot it f/64. So I would just photograph on different parts of the flower, maybe one end, the other end, or the middle, and then sandwich them together in Photoshop so that I got an entirely in-focused still life. I think 2 pictures is the most I ever put together. Most of the flower would be in focus, and then the end that wasn't, I would get from another image. Hollyhock. I found that flower just down the alley from where I live. Another hollyhock. So to make this picture better, I decided I should lose the right part of that. So it became that. Just trim that out in Photoshop. Another view of a different flower, different hollyhock. In decay. I found this picture in the alley behind me. And there it is. That's the original. It was on the pavement. And I just took the edges out, darked out the edges, and there it is, just the most perfect still life you could ever ask for. And I'm not Edward Weston, and I'm not even a still life photographer. I'm not even a photographer of flowers. But this was something for me to have fun with during the time of COVID, and I just loved my results. Here's a moss-covered wall with a heart. Hat in the hat store in Chicago. And this little series of pictures I did of the tulips, I suppose you could say it was Ernst Haas inspired, if you will, channeling Ernst Haas. But I shot these on top of my garbage cans. So it was just soft morning light. No fancy studio setup, handheld camera, nice lighting. Just fun. Just fun to be able to make pictures that were different from what I'd done in the past. And then to my backyard and the viburnum, I noticed the light on the leaves, even in low light, the contrast was amazing. And so I did a series of pictures in black and white of those. The veining of the leaves is so amazing to see close up. This is a statue in my garden, and it's not fancy. It's a giraffe, and it's just a piece of old concrete that is in pretty bad shape. The top of it is pretty much fallen apart, and this was the base and the legs. And I made a series of pictures here, and this one I like the best. You can make out the form of the animal, of the sculpture. This would go well in black and white, I think. But with the color, you can see a little bit of the granite flecking in the stone. Back to the viburnum. So here's a series of 3 leaves. That's the assistance of the birds. There is the white. And then that's a different image in different light. So what a difference a little light can make in contrast. And literally through the leaves, you're looking through to my neighbor's yard. So about 3 feet beyond is the fence, and then the neighbor's backyard. So this is just very simple work, and I'm really just an observer of trying to have fun and trying to be a little bit conscious about what's in focus, what's not in focus. And then Halloween. I put these in at the end here, trick-or-treaters. That's the Hannibal Lecter mask. The purple mask, as we call it. This is at Steinberg skating rink, and this was the skating rink in the time of COVID. And if you'd seen me, it literally was a guy with a camera pointing it at the ground. You would have said, what on earth is he making pictures of? But I was interested in the patterns and the marks in the concrete, in the surface. So if you make enough photographs, I think your style and your interests emerge. Because everything is game. We can photograph the people around us, the places we go, whatever it is we're passionate about and love. And the happy accidents will happen along the way to everyone, and they've happened to the greatest photographers ever, and they'll happen to you and me. And you just take them and say thank you. That was a gift, and it can be very inspiring. The best camera is the camera you have with you. Jay Maisel used to say, he used to tell his workshops, always carry your camera. It's the best way you can be sure to get a picture. Well, of course. But even if it's the iPhone, that's the camera you work with. So I hope just seeing some of these pictures has been a little inspiring. If not, I'm sorry, but let's make music and photographs and write and sing and dance, sculpt, whatever it is you do creatively. This is a great time to do that work, to take the time to think about it and do it. Or tweet if there's nothing else, you can always tweet. I love this statement from the Dead Poets Society movie. This line was said by Robin Williams, and I'm going to read it. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And when the human race is filled with passion, medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we live for, what we stay alive for. So that's the presentation. Happy to take questions if there are any about anything, technique, your interests.
I'll jump in here because it looks like we have a few in the chat. I can read them off to you.
Okay,
Susan,
thanks, Eva.
yeah, of course. Susan Fenwick says, Robert, now that digital photography has pretty much replaced film, do you engage in much post-processing in Lightroom or Photoshop?
I do work in Photoshop, especially with portraits. We do retouching, facial retouching. Yeah, every picture is, goes through the Photoshop lab now that is our darkroom. Very few images come out of the camera perfect. It was said initially with digital photography that unless you did sharpening in the camera, the images coming out of the cameras were necessarily a little soft and had to be sharpened. That has subsequently changed as we've added megapixels. But yes, every picture that I publish or sell goes through the Photoshop engine, and we preview images initially in Photo Mechanic, which is, for my money, the best viewer software out there. It gives you like the contact sheet ability to look at a lot of pictures quickly, and it's much faster than Lightroom. And you can turn it on, turn it off. You don't have to worry about where the pictures are. That's Photo Mechanic. And then Lightroom for editing thousands of pictures, absolutely. And then Photoshop for that one-on-one crafting of the final image or the image that you've chosen to work on. So if, for example, we make an image black and white, that will be done, with great care in Photoshop. So
we have a couple of comments here as well. Kate Cooper says, I recognized the giraffe immediately. I didn't know you guys got custody of him, but she loves seeing your work tonight.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, the giraffe lives. Still going.
Gail Taylor, oh, sorry.
Thank you, Kate.
Gail Taylor says, this was full of great and definitely full of ideas. And
thank you. Good. Well, I hope everybody saw a little something that they can take away as, as inspiration or maybe something to have fun with.
Yeah, everything, the things that you were photographing, within such reach of your home, it's interesting, all the ideas that you explored. So,
well, the movie stars weren't doing red carpets, and even my customers at home here in St. Louis weren't throwing great parties. So it's left us sort of in a timeout.
Yeah.
And a time to catch up on not only readings and movies and homework, but a time to think about why we do what it is we do, and maybe ways to do it more quietly and personally.
Right. Susan Stang says, Robert, you've been incredibly productive during this time. Good for you. The flowers decaying and otherwise against the black background are haunting and beautiful. Very evocative. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that.
And again, I'd like to remind anyone, if they have questions, they can type them in, but they can also unmute and ask them.
Sure.
Robert, this is Richard Springler.
Oh, hi, Richard.
Hi, beautiful stuff. What I'd like to compliment you on is going outside the box, doing something radically different. And that's hard for a lot of people to do, and you've accomplished it. So my compliments to you.
Well, thank you. It's, when you don't have any particular goals or aspirations or ambitions, I didn't set out to become, a great botanical photographer. You can just have fun. And if you fall on your face, so be it. And you learn a little bit as you go along. I had to learn about the focus. So my version was very primitive focus stacking, if you will, to keep the right parts of the flower, in focus. But other than that, it was just fun working with this new palette of magical colors and shapes. And so why not? I will do more of it for fun, just for myself, for sure. Absolutely.
Great.
I had concerns about the copyright issue when you photograph the TV screen. I've done it also, but I've never
you?
tried to sell it.
Well, that's a good question and a very valid comment. And I mentioned it to the personnel in my studio, and they're all younger than me. And they said, hey, we live in an age of sampling, and, where artists just steal right and left. And that's even true in photography. If you look at some of the European fine art photographers that rephotograph or repurpose or repackage the works of others. So I tried to avoid scenes that, clearly belong to other artists, but images that are wantonly appearing on the internet, graphics, blank screens, colorful screens, broadcasts, live broadcasts of primetime news that belong to all of us, really. I think that's fair game.
As a lawyer, I would agree, especially when you look at something like Warhol's taking of the Campbell's soup can.
Absolutely.
It is sampling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was a very early practitioner. I appreciate that comment. He was much ahead of his time, of course. And today it's done by all kinds of visual artists and musical artists. So I don't think we have to worry about that so much. It depends on what it is you're photographing, and in particular. But I think that pretty much everything is fair game now. So not to worry. Have fun.
Robert, this is Susan's.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. So I didn't know we'd be able to talk directly, so that's why I just made a very simple comment. But this is something that is I would have needed to say directly, because I don't have the patience to type it. When you were showing all the work of the screens, and screens very close up, and you'd say, I'd put this on my screen, or this was on the TV. I was trying to reconcile with the way that screens used to be when there were vertical and horizontal oscillators on the old TV screens, and the patterns were horizontal lines with these kind of vertical blips. And so I'm wondering, were you using sometimes computer screens, sometimes TV screens? Was it maybe something's LED or something's plasma? Because those fanning shapes and the very different patterns that you got from one image to the next are really a little bit startling. Do you have some thoughts about what is causing that?
Well, the first images I did were at the inauguration, and I was shooting those off the widescreen television at home, which is just a 60-inch Samsung. And so that's probably the newest. And then I made more images off smaller televisions at home, the 22 or 28-inch flat panel displays. And then I moved to photographing off of the computer monitors that I use for my professional work, both the Dells that I have at home and the Apple Cinema displays that I have here at the studio. And each one of them has its own grid structure. And I've even seen the grids when I photographed an iPad. If you photograph through an iPad, you'll see that grid eventually. And it made a great deal of difference if I used, depending on what camera I used. So I found that I was able to achieve, all of these strange different effects by moving between screen and camera. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by the results I got with the iPhone, which because it's a lower resolution camera than the ones I use professionally, it gave this beautiful smear, which I wouldn't have thought to even attempt to do in Photoshop. I mean, that would have been schmaltzy, to try to add a soft focus or Monet painterly effect, but to get it right off the screen. And every time I would try a few images every day, and I would just be amazed at how different each day's work was. And I kept thinking, well, how am I going to keep this interesting and different? I've sort of been there, done that. I've shot the screen, I see the grid, and then I realized, wow, there's just an exponential number of opportunities here. And I would, for example, just bending the angle of the phone held to the screen changes the way the image looks, because you get the foreground screen in focus, and then that's further away, falls out of focus. And one more comment, because there's this grid in all those pictures, it pretty much eliminates being able to use any cloning in Photoshop. If you see something you want to clean up, because there's no way to recreate, that grid. I mean, you're stuck with the grid, and so it's pretty much, what you get is what you have to work with, and which is something I'm not used to, because if there's a cigarette butt in the, behind my celebrity, it's gone in 10 seconds. Whereas in this work, anything you adjust, or liquefy or do anything to changes the pattern in that grid. Now, the moiré, the color moiré is just something that you get with the image. And sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less, but it's just been so interesting and fun to play, if you will. And and hopefully this will develop into another, a fuller body of work for me that I can continue to explore. But I was happy to share it with you, and I'm glad you like it.
We have
Great,
time.
thank you.
Sorry. We have time for about one or two more questions. One here in the chat from Timothy Quaid. He's wondering, so he has an image that's been chosen as a finalist in a competition, and he wants to have it printed at 20 by 30 inches.
Yep.
And he asks if you have any advice on where to get a great affordable print.
Well, photographic prints are made at Diversified Lab here in St. Louis, and they print on photographic paper. If you want a fine art print, I would go to Boulevard Gallery, and you're going to pay a little more there, but you're going to get an artist print, and it's that you get to work with the studio masters there, and it'll be an inkjet pigment print that will have a life of 100 years or more. So so one is a little less expensive option, standard photographic print from Diversified Labs, or the Boulevard Gallery print. he uses the Canon systems, and they're state of the art. So, and they
I am right here.
Boulevard prints for IPHF, you know, on occasion. So he's great.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Do we have any other questions tonight? All right. Well, thank you so much, Robert. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight here for the IPHF Digital Happy Hour Unplugged, of course, with Robert Robert George. We're talking about Robert Bullivant, that's why. With Robert George, you've been great. It's been great to see your body of work during COVID too. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Eva. Appreciate it.
Everyone, like I said, we're having a survey go out. So if you would take the time to fill that out, we always appreciate it. So that's all we have to say tonight. Thank you so much.
Enjoy.
Thanks a
Good
lot,
to you.
Robert.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.